Hello everyone, my name is Plínio Marco Detoni. I'm a professor at the Midwestern State University, a psychology professor, and I'm the head of the Psychology of Bilingualism Lab. And today I'm going to show you guys how to draw the medial view of the cerebrum. So this is the basic drawing. Actually, I'm not going to explain the whole drawing here, but just this upper part of the drawing. That is actually the cerebrum, because the rest of the drawing here would be the cerebellum, the brainstem here, and the spinal cord. So we're going to actually focus on this upper part. But before, I want to show you guys how to get to this drawing here. So here we have a brain model, and here we have the lateral view of the cerebrum, which is this part here. So as we saw in other videos, that would be the cerebrum. Here we have the cerebellum, and here, down here, we have the brainstem. And the cerebrum can actually be broken down into two structures. One structure that is actually the outer part of the cerebrum, that is called telencephalon, but also a structure that can be found here, that would be the telencephalon, would be this outer part here. That is actually what we're going to be focusing on today. But there is also this, let's say, this part here, kind of the inner part of the cerebrum, that is called, that is called diencephalon. We're not going to see that today. So we're going to just focus on the telencephalon, that is this outer part of the cerebrum. But for us to get to this drawing, we actually have to divide this brain model into two hemispheres. So here we have the left hemisphere, here we have the right hemisphere. And when we split the brain into two halves, we are gonna get to this drawing here. And that would be this structure here, would be the medial view of the whole brain. But as we can see in the title, we're going to just analyze the cerebrum, which would be this structure up here. But as I said before, not the whole cerebrum, but actually just the telencephalon. That is this structure up here. Here, the inner part, we have the diencephalon. So diencephalon here, telencephalon here, telencephalon, diencephalon. We're going to focus just on the telencephalon today. So now I'm going to show you how to actually draw all these structures. So first, I'm going to start by drawing the corpus callosum. That is actually this structure that I painted in black. So I'm going to just draw it here. Something like that. So I'm going to just paint it here, because this structure is actually different from the rest, in the sense that this structure here, that is the corpus callosum, I'm going to write down everything in the end of this video, the name of the structures, but the corpus callosum is actually made up of white matter, and the rest of the cerebrum here, that we're going to see, I'm going to draw here in a little while, is actually made up of gray matter. So that's why I'm going to just paint it here. So that would be white matter, the corpus callosum, that is actually the structure that put together the two hemispheres. One of the structures, the main structure. Other than that, I'm going to draw here one of the gyrus, like this. And now the rest of the hemisphere. So something like that. So what I did here, I just drew the corpus callosum, this gyrus here, and the rest of the hemisphere. And for us to finish this drawing, because it's actually pretty simple, I'm going to draw the central sulcus, other to sulci that we can find around the central sulcus. And here in the back, I'm going to just draw kind of a V. It's like a V-shape sulci. There are two sulci here. 1, 2. And that's pretty much it. So that would be the telencephalon. That is this part of the cerebrum that is actually the outer part of the cerebrum. And so, okay, so other than that, let's just name these structures for you guys to have all the neuroanatomical structures related to the medial view of the telencephalon in this case. So let's start with the sulci. Sulci. So we have here this little sulci. That's going to be number 1. Here we have this one here, 2. And here in the back, 3. Just remembering that actually this part here is the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe starts here and it goes until the central sulcus, just like it happens actually in the lateral view. So if we get, more or less, if we get the lateral view of the brain, we're going to see that the central sulcus divides the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. Central sulcus. What happens is that the central sulcus goes around the hemisphere and finishes here in the middle. So that would be the boundary between the frontal lobe here in the front and the parietal lobe here on top of the brain. That would be the parietal lobe. I'm not going to write these structures because we already did that in the previous video. So if you want to know how to write these structures in English, you can just check out there on the other ones on this playlist. And here we have another structure, very important, that is the parietal-occipital sulcus. That is actually this one here as well. So what happens to the parietal-occipital sulcus is that it starts here, goes around this hemisphere. The same thing happens on the other hemisphere and finishes here. So on the lateral view, this is the medial view of the brain, or in this case, the cerebrum. On the lateral view, that is this one here, we can just see the parietal-occipital sulcus very little. But why? Because this is just the rest, like the final part of this sulcus here. So here we have the parietal lobe until here, and down here we have the occipital lobe. So that would be the occipital lobe. And of course, the temporal lobe, we can't see the temporal lobe here because the temporal lobe would be in the back of this structure, like this. So here we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe in the back, and the temporal lobe is here, right? It's here, so in the back. So there is no way to see on this view, to see the temporal lobe on this view. Okay, so let's move on. So here we have 1, 2, 3 sulci. We also have another one here, so 4, 5 here, 6, that is the sulci that actually goes from here all the way to here, because this other one is actually considered another sulcus. And yeah, the last one would be this sulcus here. So this one here, on top of the corpus callosum. So that would be 8. Okay, so let's write it down here, everything. So 1, that would be the central sulcus, central sulcus. This one here, 2, it's called paracentral sulcus, paracentral sulcus. This one, 3, is called marginal sulcus, marginal sulcus. 4, as I said before, it's the parietal-occipital sulcus. Parietal-occipital sulcus. 5, that would be the calcarine sulcus. Calcarine sulcus. This one here, it's called 6, right? Yeah. So 6, that would be the sulcus of the cingulate gyrus, because this gyrus here is called cingulate gyrus. So here we have the sulcus of cingulate gyrus, sulcus of cingulate gyrus. And 7, that it's actually a continuation of this previous one here, it's called subparietal sulcus, because that's the parietal lobe, so subparietal. Subparietal sulcus. And the last one here, 8, is called sulcus of corpus callosum, because that structure is called corpus callosum. Here is the sulcus. Sulcus of corpus, that's an R here, corpus callosum. Sulcus of corpus callosum. Okay, that would be the sulci. And when it comes to the gyri, so I'm gonna just keep writing the numbers here. So 8. So we have 9, this gyrus here, this one here, 9. 10, this big one here, 11 here in the middle, 12, 13, 14. And that's it. Actually, this view, it's quite simple. Some of the terms are kind of complicated to learn because they are different, but once you get used to them, actually, it's not a big deal. All right, so now the gyri. Sulci until 8, gyri. So 9 until 14, right? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 9, that would be the very related to the sulcus here, the cingulate gyrus, cingulate gyrus, cingulate gyrus. That is actually one of the gyrus related to the limbic system. So one of the structures of the brain related to emotions, and also related to memory. So the limbic system, cingulate gyrus. Then here is actually the same gyrus that we can find, that can be found here. So it's actually this one here. So if we get the lateral view of the brain, here, there is just one mistake here. because here we have one gyrus. There is the precentral gyrus, because that's the central sulcus, so that's the precentral gyrus. And here we have the superior frontal gyrus. And what happens is that this gyrus goes also around the hemisphere and finishes here. So then is also the superior frontal gyrus. Superior frontal gyrus. Okay? So 11. That's the only one that has a different name, in the sense that 11 is not actually a gyrus. I'm going to just keep it here with the gyri, but it's considered a lobule. Why? Because actually there are many little gyri here that has no name. And when we put them together, so we don't have a gyrus anymore, we have a lobule. So, and the same things actually happens here, right? So as we saw in a previous video, this structure here is called lobule, and this structure here is also called lobule. So that would be the superior parietal lobule and the inferior parietal lobule. Why? Because there are a lot of gyri here in the middle. So a lobule is actually composed by a lot of different gyri, and it's the same situation here. So that would be the 11. Paracentral, it's written like this, lobule, paracentral lobule. 12 and 13, the names are related, so I'm going to start with 13 here. So that would be the cuneus. If I'm not mistaken, it's written with the U. Cuneus. In 12, it's the precuneus. Precuneus. Okay. I'm not totally sure if it's written with the U or maybe O. You guys can Google it. I'm not totally sure. No. I feel like it's like this, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. In 14, this one here is called lingual gyrus. Lingual gyrus. Or the other name, but in English is that people tend not to use this name too much. It's the name actually in Portuguese, like similar to that. It would be the occipital, the lateral occipital temporal gyrus, because it's actually the same one that shows up here in this view of the brain, in the inferior view. So if we get the inferior view, we are gonna see that there is a gyrus. No, sorry, it's not lateral. It's the medial. It's this one here. So this gyrus is actually the end of this gyrus here. It's another part of the same gyrus. So this one here, it's the lingual gyrus. That's the lingual gyrus, or also named as the medial occipital temporal gyrus. Medial occipital temporal gyrus. Why? Because this one here is the lateral occipital temporal gyrus. Lateral. So we have lateral occipital temporal gyrus, or another name that is actually the name that is more used in English is would be fusiform gyrus here, fusiform gyrus, and the lingual gyrus, this one here, that continues here, the lingual gyrus. Okay, so that would be it. Other than that, of course, as I said before, we have the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. That is not a gyrus, it's not a sulcus, it's the corpus callosum, made up of white matter. So, corpus callosum, white matter. White matter. And the rest of this view, that is actually made up of cortex, is gray matter. Gray matter. Okay? So that's it. When it comes to some neuropsychological functions, we can highlight maybe, a couple of them here. So first, we would have this structure here. Here is more related to reasoning, intelligence, executive functions. So executive functions would be related to this structure. So let's just write it here. Executive functions. Executive functions. So reasoning, intelligence, problem solving, actually, problem solving, attention, working memory. Those are some of the executive functions related to this area. Here we have this part here. And here also we have the pain-filled homunculus. So this one here, that is actually in the frontal lobe, it is the motor pain-filled homunculus. The motor pain-filled homunculus, which means that this structure that actually continues here on the precentral gyrus is responsible for representing the motor representation of the body. So it's because of these structures here that we can actually move the different parts of the body. And here in the back, that is part of the parietal lobe, we have the sensory, instead of motor, sensory, pain-filled homunculus. Sensory. And sensory in the sense of tactile. So we have the tactile sensation. So here in this structure that actually continues here, in the post-central gyrus, we have the tactile representation of the body. So whatever you feel with your hands, with your feet, with like your whole body, gets to some specific parts of this structure. So these two structures, as we saw in a previous video when we talked about the lateral view, actually, it works as a map, as in this case, two maps of the body. Okay, other than that, we have here around this structure here, around the calcarine sulcus, we have the visual sensation. Visual sensation, which means that everything that you see, all stimuli that we can see in our field of vision, gets to specific parts of this structure. So this structure also works as a map. It's very similar to what happens to the pain-filled homunculus. the two of them. So it's actually a map. In this case here, a visual map. So all the stimuli that we can identify in different parts of the field of vision gets to different parts of this structure here. And as I said before, the cingulate gyrus is related to the limbic system. That is a whole system, as the name says, obviously, related to emotions and memory, among other functions. So I think that would be it. Thank you so much. Any question, just let me know.